What was it that got you interested in developing CPD topics?
I think there was something about the whole post-pandemic period, that's going back a little while. But during that period when we were all quite isolated, I've always kept notes of things that I'm interested in and would like to spend some more time with, but never seem to quite find time to spend. So I had a little notebook. And when I came to look at some of those topics, a lot of those were quite relevant to the process we all found, partly coming out of the pandemic, but then also the economic challenges and just the bigger, complicated, challenging world picture. And it seemed really difficult when I looked around, when we both looked around, to find any kind of updated CPD that helped inform those topics. So there's been theories evolving and emerging, but not always that well publicized beyond the academic sphere. And it just seemed a really timely place to start thinking about what a CPD program might look like, not least from my own interest, a chance to actually think about these topics that I'd kind of had sitting in my head. And preparing a CPD program was a chance to start focusing, I guess, on what those topics might look like and what might be most interesting. And I think in terms of audience, what we were also looking for was experienced coaches, people who perhaps been coaching for a number of years. Often we all get a little bit set in our ways and we all have favorite theories and approaches to clients. And I think there's something really interesting about reconnecting with theory, new theories, revisiting old theories, and being challenged a little bit about how we practice. So bringing some of these new concepts to the fore, thinking about practice work, and also genuinely thinking how those would help with some of the broader challenges that clients are facing, whether that's personal challenges or economic challenges or just the bigger picture of this complex world stage, I guess, that we're all trying to make sense of.
Mm. Yeah, I think I find as a practitioner, it's nice to read the theory, but it's often quite difficult by yourself to think about how you might implement it. And I found one of the things that was really stimulating and creative was being able to discuss it with a series of practitioners in a space because it gains a sort of bigger meaning once everybody is applying it against their own work. And there was something about us all working on the material together that felt very creative and useful.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we have a look at the program and have a little bit of a scamper through? Um, so, do you want to talk a little bit to how the three sections were pulled together?
Yes. So when we came to look at topics and discuss topics, they started to fall into some kind of shape. And we decided to focus initially on some of the newer career concepts. And the three that we've focused on in the first three workshops. First is hope, nurturing hope in career. And that just seemed a really relevant place to start the program, given the challenges that we've perhaps all faced as individuals and currently face both as coaches ourselves, but also our coachees. Nurturing hope in career seemed a really helpful place to start. And there is theory around hope, and there is often very little connection made to practice. So it seemed a really useful one to begin with. And the second one we looked at is liminality. I think liminality is absolutely fascinating. It's been around as a theory for a few years. The career sector has picked it up. But again, this is one that hasn't necessarily moved into practice, and really useful, particularly for things like thinking about career transitions and conceptualizing transitions, but also how we can help clients through using that particular lens. And the third one we looked at is who shapes our careers. Again, going back a few years, there has been interest in who surrounds us and shapes our ideas about careers. It might be friends and family, it might be people in the community, it might be people that we've worked with. But there is new and evolving ideas about who shapes our careers. And that has implications for both our clients, but also us as coaches and how we might help them.
Yeah. Okay. And then the middle four was really about how we are working now. And rethinking the coaching room was very much response to, again, the pandemic and the way in which a lot of coaches moved online almost immediately. And it became the default way of working for lots of coaches. But we'd not really stopped to reflect almost like what we'd lost in the fire and how different it was in terms of working face to face and online. And then you had this whole emergence, working outside the coaching room completely and walking coaching or working in nature as well. So there was something about the way coaches are now working that has shifted, and we decided to have a little look at how what the theory is saying about it and link it. The fifth one was around transference and projective identification, and we're never going to be able to get you to be a psychodynamic practitioner in one session. But the transference, countertransference, and projective identification are always like the gifts that keep on giving in terms of theory, and they always illuminate the relationship between the coach and the client, and particularly if that relationship is being derailed by something that's going on that is not visible to either party. So, although we've talked about that quite a lot in the past, it's always something that is good to revisit because if every time you revisit, it gives a sort of different level of understanding. And then the next two, six and seven, were very much a response to a lot of contemporary issues around diversity. So there's a lot of focus on social justice at the moment, as rightly there should be. There is the whole LGBT or GSDR diversity. Neurodiversity has come up as a topic in many people's practice, and if you work in education, there's a great focus on it. So these two were sort of twinned together to look at an overview in general of how we can treat diversity. And then in the second one, we almost focus in on ethnicity, GSDR, gender, sexuality, and relationship diversity, and neurodiversity as different forms of diversity.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. And then thinking about the final two sessions, we wanted to address endings in two different but related ways. And the first is thinking about later stages and endings of careers. And I think in the past, when we've been involved in training coaches and thinking about careers, there's been a great deal of emphasis in the literature and the theory and in training programs on entering the workplace, coming from education into work, and then what happens during the course of your career, things like mid-career transitions, work-life balance, and things that happen during the course of your career. And I think what's tended to get lost a little bit then is what happens in the later stages of your career. And this has become a topic of much more interest in the literature. And partly that's come about because we're all working potentially for longer, given government directives. We're an ageing population. And so we thought it would be really interesting to put together session 8 and focus on rethinking retirement, thinking about what retirement might look like, but also how as coaches we might support people through that retirement process, both thinking about it, the retirement process itself, and also what happens when you're retired. So that was one way of thinking about endings, career endings. And then our very final session is thinking about endings in the coaching process itself. And again, although this is sometimes touched on in coaching programs, it isn't really until you come into practice that managing the ending of a coaching relationship really comes to the fore. And there are lots of suggestions in the literature. Actually, even as we begin work with a client, we should, as coaches, have the ending with that client in mind. And that sounds really strange when you sort of say it, when you say it, but actually, beginning a relationship means that as coaches, we're responsible not only for the development of that relationship, but how ultimately that relationship will be drawn to a close. And that raises lots of issues, both for the client and for us as coaches. And there's really useful and interesting literature, research, and theories that can help us frame endings. And of course, if we think about an ending as well, the other way, the other thing that happens is as we end a relationship, perhaps with clients, there's a new beginning, both for us and for clients. There's something really interesting about what happens next. And that's both for clients, but also for us, and thinking about our broader practice. Um, Forward looking rather than just being in the moment with our work. So we end on a session called Endings and New Beginnings, both from a client perspective, but also perhaps from our own coaching perspective as well.
Thanks, Helen. And would you like to say a little about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so I have been training initially and then working as a coach for pretty much 20 years now. I had a background originally in recruitment and did do some labour market research, but I did a mid-career transition myself. I was looking for work that fitted around family commitments at the time. So I retrained as a career coach. And I did that at Birkbeck. I did a master's course at Birkbeck with a view to setting up my own coaching practice, which I did. And I've run that now pretty much 20 years. I work as a coach, but also in recent years as a supervisor, so supervising coaching practice, which I really love. That's become a much more substantive part of my practice work in more recent years. And alongside that, what I didn't anticipate was I never really left Birkbeck. I stayed on after I'd done my master's degree, did some teaching. I've done some research, wrote up a couple of papers, and then I was offered the chance to do a PhD. So I did looked at low skill careers and talked to taxi drivers for my PhD, which I really enjoyed, and finished that about 4 years ago. And I think coming out the other side of that, the really nice place that I find myself, I think of myself as a research practitioner, somebody who has a foot in the academic camp and a foot in the practice camp. And I really like that. Something about making sure we bring theory to practice, but also using our practice experience to inform what it might be useful to research.
Thanks. And if I just say about myself, so I also had a mid-career transition into studying at Birkbeck, originally doing organisational behaviour, but then swapped over into career coaching. And then when I came out of Birkbeck, was practicing as a career coach, primarily in the outplacement area, although I've moved across and I've been working in educational settings with students and in organisations as well. Um, I couldn't quite leave, so I've gone back to Birkbeck, and I'm now an associate lecturer on the career coaching postgraduate diploma and masters there. And about 5 years ago, I also decided that I wanted to become a counsellor. So I studied counselling and psychotherapy at UEL. So I really appreciate this sort of overlap between the therapy literature and the coaching literature. and how these play out in the room between the coach and the client. Okay, so that's us. If you're interested in the program, they are run on these dates throughout 2025. We'll be running them on a Wednesday evening from 6 to 8:30, and they'll be on Zoom. They're quite pacey, so generally they're split up into a number of different sections of presenting theory, and then you going off into a small group to discuss the implications for yourself, your clients, or your practice going forward. The booking link is down at the bottom. This is mypath.co.uk/events. And you can either pay on an individual basis, which is £45. Booking for the first one is now open. And once booking for one closed, we'll be opening it up for the next one. Or we're also offering a season pass for those people who know they're going to make at least 8 of them. And we're doing a sort of discount. If you pay for 8, you get all 9. And that's also available at the moment up until the 29th of January. So we hope that you get booking, and we look forward to seeing you at some point in 2025 for some career coaching CPD.